Uh, Warm welcome to all of you on behalf of IPSA. I am Suparna Kamath. Um, we will be having the 10th talk. So as we move into double digits for this lecture series, I would call upon our trustee, Dr. Sureka Zingde, to introduce you to this lecture series. Uh, to introduce Madam, she has been our immediate past president, and she retired as Deputy Director of Cancer Research Institute at Tata Memorial Center. She is presently on several institutional boards and committees. So I request Dr. Zingde to introduce Professor Vidita Vaidya.
Thank you, Suparna. Friends, on behalf of the trustees, the president, members of the executive committee of IPSA, it is my great privilege to welcome you all and to introduce Dr. Vidita Vaidya, who is professor at TIFA, to this IPSA Science and Our Life lecture series. Vidita, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and being with us here today.
Thank you.
We are all well aware that science influences and shapes human lives from conception to death. At each step of this journey, we are exposed to multiple factors, both internal and external. In a recent review on precision medicine and its connection to chronic diseases, Subramanian et al. Had said in Journal of Translational Medicine that he refers to these factors as exposomes, and I quite caught on to that terminology. These exposomes include lifestyles such as diet, physical activity, could be smoking, alcohol, drugs. The second one would be physical and chemical factors such as pollution, temperatures. The other one, the third exposome is social factors such as stress, social interactions, socio-economic factors, and of recent times, ecosystems, both population, global warming, the cement and concrete environment that we are exposed to. And an imbalance in any of these could lead to adverse health effects and chronic diseases such as cardiovascular, diabetes, inflammation, imbalance even in the gut microbe, which in turn could lead to depression. Depression in turn could affect changes in hormones, metabolic enzymes, and inflammation, to name a few. In short, there is a circle of events which could affect our normal functioning. Through the science and our live series of lectures, for which we are gathered here today, IBSA's endeavor is to invite eminent scientists and personalities on this virtual platform to enlighten citizens about basic day-to-day phenomena and other necessities of our times in a very simplified manner. These lectures cover a variety of topics, including health, education, food, history, finance, etc. In the last few lectures have included Aerospace Journey by Dr. Tessie Thomas, Organ Donation by Dr. Astrid Gajiwala from the Roto, and Padma Shri Rohini Godbole on telling us how do we know what lies within us. In this 10th lecture of SOL, Professor Vidita Vaidya will today explain to us about the adaptive and maladaptive changes associated with early life stress. But before she begins her lecture, I'd like to inform you about her accomplishments. Professor Vaidya received undergraduate training at St. Xavier's, Mumbai, moved on to do a PhD at Yale University in the US. That's where her journey with stress and antidepressants started, I guess. Following this, were postdoctoral stints in Europe at the Karolinska Institute and Oxford University. And in 2000, Professor Vaidya returned back to India TIFR to join as a faculty. If Vidita permits, Vidita is an extremely well acknowledged neuroscientist, and I'm really proud to be here today to be able to mention this to all of you, and we are very happy to have you with us. A research group at TIFR is interested in understanding the neurocircuitry of emotion, its modulation by life experiences, and the alterations in emotional neurocircuitry that underlie complex psychiatric disorders like depression and anxiety. For her accomplishments, and which she attributes more to her group's work, she was given the National Bioscientist Award in 2012. She received the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award in Medical Sciences in 2015. This is an extremely prestigious award for um, scientists in this country. She's a fellow of the Indian National Science Academy. Vidita has recently received the Nature Award for Excellence in Mentoring in the Mid Career category for India, that is in 2019. Vidita is committed to equity, diversity, and inclusion in the sciences. Vidita, the platform is yours, and we look forward to your lecture. Thank you for
Thank,
being with us again.
thank you, Dr. Zingde. It is a absolute pleasure and privilege, and it's lovely to be introduced by you because I have such a soft spot for you over the years that it's always a pleasure to see you, and to be introduced by you makes it extra special.
Thank
Actually,
you.
it's particularly special because one of my favorite teachers is here, Dr. Sheila Donde. And, my love affair with neuroscience goes back to when she taught us neuroscience in genetics and neuroscience in undergraduate. So it's just, this makes it extremely special to have her here. Just, made my day. Very happy to be talking about this work with her around. Hi, Sheila.
Hi. Hi,
Yeah.
Vidhi. Thanks so much. So nice to see you.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is tell you about what happens to your brain when you're under stress. And thankfully, most of us actually adapt very reasonably well to stress. But what happens when we don't adapt? Okay, so that's the topic for today. So, what I want to start off by doing is first introducing the word stress, because there are so many things that can fall under the category of stress. So, a very broad definition would be that stress is anything that disrupts the homeostatic balance of your body. And what do I mean by homeostatic balance, right? So, for example, you have sleep rhythms, you have circadian rhythms, you have rhythms of your hormonal cycles that go through a particular pattern. You have a variety of responses, physiological, that are under a balance and working normally in your body. Anything that disrupts that can be defined as a stress. So now you can see how many things that could be. For example, if you were exposed to extreme cold, that can actually disrupt the homeostatic balance. So that could also be described as a stress. You're waiting to find out whether you have passed your exams. That also disrupts your homeostatic balance. So that is also a stress. So anything that disrupts homeostatic balance, it could mean physical, psychological, immune, infection, a variety of factors that disrupt your homeostatic balance will then be defined as stress. And there are many things that we immediately recognize as acute physical stressors. So if you decide that today, you've never done an exercise and you decide, I'm going to run 5 kilometers straight. You've never practiced for it. You've never done it. If you start straight by running 5 kilometers, that is actually an acute physical stress on your body. That's one example. For example, you are stuck in a place where the temperature is 50 degrees Celsius. That will be a severe acute physical stress on your body. So there are a variety of acute physical stressors, and our body is well adapted to handling them most of the time. Then there are chronic physical stressors. So, for example, we don't face it today in today's India, but just 70, 80 years ago, when famines were not unusual in our country, lack of access to food was a serious physical stress. And now it's still a physical stress for those who are at the bottom of the socioeconomic pyramid, where not having access to food and chronic food deprivation can actually become a chronic physical stress. Chronic infections can also fall into this category. Okay, so there are chronic physical stressors, and our body is not ideally equipped to handle these, but it is not badly equipped. It manages it pretty well. And then there are psychological and social stressors. So, for example, let's say you've applied for a grant and you don't know if you're going to receive the money. And you worry about it for weeks and weeks and months, and you don't even know when the committee is going to meet, whether their grant is going to happen, but it starts giving you sleepless nights. It's a psychological stressor. Or let's say you have a fight with your neighbor, and the relationship has gone really bad, and you're no longer able to deal with your neighbor. And every day when you wake up in the morning, you have this horrible feeling in the pit of your stomach about having to see this person, and it becomes a chronic social stress. Now, these kinds of stressors, we very rarely have control over terminating them. And they are actually stressors which our body is not very well designed and well equipped to handle. And if you think about the kind of stressors we face today, a lot of them are psychological and social stressors. What do you do when you face any of these kinds of stressors? You attempt to restore your homeostatic balance. Any stress response is an attempt to the body to come back to normal working conditions. Okay. And more often than not, the left side response will happen. You will have an adaptive response to stress. You'll reestablish homeostasis and you will just forget about the stress. You will have adapted. Now, a great example of this is, imagine somebody comes from Finland or Sweden and moves to India, okay, moves to Mumbai. And now they have to start taking the local train. The first day, they almost faint. I mean, they cannot believe that the local train is like this. It is so difficult to get in. It's a horribly stressful experience. They have never seen so many people in their life. And how are all these people going to jump into this train? And then 5 months later, you meet the same person and they're traveling by train without a problem. Because they've adapted, it's no longer stressful. So our system is very well equipped to adapt to a challenge, and we adjust very quickly to challenges. But sometimes we fail to do so. And when we fail to do so, the homeostatic balance doesn't return. In fact, a new balance is achieved, which is called an allostatic balance, which is a disrupted state from the normal functioning. And when you have this kind of allostatic shifted state, you actually end up with something called an allostatic load. Chronic stress on your body of maintaining a disrupted or a new balance. Okay. When this happens, it can precipitate, worsen, exacerbate stress-related disorders. And what are some of the stress-related disorders? Depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, cardiovascular disease, stroke, hypertension, ulcerative colitis, a lot of gut-related problems, irritable bowel syndrome, immune dysfunction, allergies, rheumatoid arthritis. I'm not even going to, this list goes on. There's pretty much, very rarely will you find a disease that is not worsened by stress. It may not be caused by stress, but it's certainly going to get worsened by stress if there is chronic stress. So why have I put up this picture of this cheetah and this deer? It's because the systems that our body uses to handle stress responses, which is our hormonal stress response, is an old evolutionary conserved pathway. Now, both the animals in this image are under stress. The deer is under stress because it has to run away as fast as possible. And the cheetah is under stress because it's hungry, and or maybe it has to feed its babies and it has to catch the deer. So both animals are under stress. So both animals are going to have a very similar response. Their hypothalamus is going to activate their pituitary, which is going to secrete adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is going to go via the bloodstream to their adrenal glands, which sit bilaterally on top of their kidneys. And these animals are going to secrete a lot of corticosterone or cortisol, which is essentially the stress hormone. That hormone is going to mobilize glucose to the muscles. Very important. Both of these animals will have to run at super fast speed. So whatever glucose you have, right now is not the time to use your glucose to do digestion and to do reproduction and to do any of that. You just want to use it for your muscles to just run at full speed and get away if you can, right? Either get away or to find your food. Now, our system, this is the same system you and I use when we are under stress. So think about it. When you see your neighbor who you had a fight with, the same hormones are being secreted in your body as are being secreted by this deer and is being secreted by the cheetah. It's the same pathway, except that you are using it in situations which are quite different now, okay? So our system was beautifully adapted by this acute physical stress. So if you see this picture, you know that 10 minutes later, one of two things has happened. Either the deer has gotten away or the cheetah is eating the deer. So you know the outcome. One of the two things has to happen, which means it is short-lived, it terminates, and there is an end result, right? It's finished quickly. So something happens. If the deer is lucky, it escapes. If the cheetah is lucky, the cheetah gets food. Okay. So, but what about for chronic stressors? If you have a bad relationship with your boss, you work with your boss for 5 years, and if every day when you see your boss, you do this, there's no termination to this response. This is keeping on getting activated repeatedly in an aberrant manner and over activating a response. Now just think about what it does. What is the job of these stress hormones? It is to shut down digestion. It is to redirect the glucose to your muscles. So your muscles are optimally, it's a fight or flight response. So either you have to fight or you have to run away. One of the two things is to happen. But when you're in an office room and you're activating this, then you're not running away anywhere. And you're still activating the exact same response. It is shutting off digestion. It is curtailing all the reproductive hormones. And there's no wonder why associated with severe stress is infertility, because you shut down basic biological processes to divert your energies to handling the crisis. If the crisis is a chronic psychological stressor, then you're going to shut off a lot of things. You're also going to immobilize, your immune system is going to get mobilized towards the periphery in case you get bitten by something, or you're preparing for an attack, and you're going to shut down certain immune pathways as well. So autoimmune disorders again have a component that is tied up with stress, and they do flare up and they do get worse when an individual is under stress. Now I want to show you this photograph for the following reason, because I've made my point. On the left hand side is a deer, cheetah, and a lion. All are under stress, but the outcome is going to be closed very fast. On the right hand side, many of you will recognize Dalal Street and the Bombay Stock Exchange. This is the BSE building, and you see all these people looking at the BSE or the NSE indices, and these are traders who are trading on a daily basis, and either they lose everything or they gain things, and associated with that, they have a fair bit of chronic, sustained, everyday stress that their body is exposed to. So now I want you to look at this data. This is from the New England Journal of Medicine. While this is really very Western data, it's not dramatically different for the global South, which includes developing countries, which includes countries or emerging economies like India as well. Okay. Look at the reasons or the causes of death in the 1900s and look at the reasons for causes in death in 2010. 2020 is an aberration because we had a global pandemic. So there will be an infectious disease that shows up as a major component. But if you forget 2020 and overall you look at 1900 compared to 2010, first of all, life expectancy has gone up dramatically. In the past, about 50 years ago, very rarely did people live into their 70s and late 80s. It is not unheard of to find people who are over 90 and in there pushing the lower hundreds today. It's not unheard of. I was reading about a case of someone who's 117 and has just recovered from COVID, which itself is pretty impressive, right? So you have life expectancy has gone up dramatically. And the reason it has gone up is because of biomedical sciences, but also because hygiene, access to food, access to, health in terms of resources. There's a lot more access that we have today. On the left-hand side, you will see that there are many, many infectious diseases that kill people. On the right-hand side, you see things like cancer, heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's eventually, etc., etc. And what you see is that it's a predisposition towards stress-associated illnesses, which are the major killers of our times. Okay. Now, why am I bringing that up? I want to remind you of the system. So if you walk away from my talk with just a few main sort of ideas, think about this stress hormone pathway. Okay. You are stressed. That stress is conveyed to your brain in many ways. I mean, you visually see it. You may experience it in many other ways. There are many different ways by which stress is conveyed into the brain. And many times for us, it can be visual. So that's the initial driver, but it could be smell. For example, if you smell a fire, that would be a source of stress. Obviously, you don't want to get caught in a fire. There are a variety of ways in which you can experience stress. That is conveyed to the hypothalamus, which sits at the base of the brain right here. And it secretes a hormone called corticotropin releasing factor, CRF or CRH, which then goes through the pituitary portal circulation to the pituitary, which secretes adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is a hormone that makes it through your bloodstream and goes to your adrenal glands, which are bilateral, sitting above your kidneys. The adrenal cortex secretes the hormone cortisol, and the adrenal medulla secretes the neurotransmitter or neurohormone epinephrine. Now you can see what epinephrine will do. Epinephrine will increase your heart rate, which makes sense because you want to pump blood faster to every part of your body, just in case you have to run away very fast because a cheetah may be coming behind you. Right? That's what your body is prepared. Evolutionarily, that is what your body is preparing for. 10,000 years ago is when agriculture and farming started. But 10,000 years is nothing on the evolutionary time scale. It's like not even a blip. Okay. Your system was prepared for you being out in the wilderness where wild animals can chase you, etc. So you need the epinephrine and the cortisol. The cortisol is going to direct glucose to your muscles. Epinephrine is going to actually increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure so that you're prepared to do something, either hide quickly, run away, fight, whatever you have to do. Okay. Now, this is the pathway that I just told you about. This particular pathway is a fight and flight response pathway. What is interesting is not only is this pathway working on your body, which is on your muscles and on your liver and on your gut and your skin, it's also working on targets in the brain. On the left-hand side is a cartoon of the human brain. On the right-hand side is a cartoon of the rat brain. Like this, the nose would be here. Actually, they are kind of opposing each other. So in the case of the human brain, the nose is on the right-hand side. In the case of the rodent brain, the nose will be on the left-hand side. That is if you're seeing it as facing the screen. Okay. There's a structure here called the hippocampus, the structure in C, and this big pink banana-like structure that is there in the rodent brain. It's not as though it is bigger in the rodent brain. It is just proportionally looks larger because in the human brain, the cortex has expanded hugely. There is a reason why we have many, many facilities that our other mammalian cousins may not have. And because our cortex has become quite gigantic, so the hippocampus looks relatively small. But it's not small per se, okay? It's a pretty big structure. It's involved in learning, it's involved in memory, it's involved in control of stress responses, it's involved in context of situations, etc. Okay? So here's the structure called the hippocampus, and there's also a region called the amygdala, which is associated with fear responses. So what happens in this reason why the structure is interesting is here is the receptor. This is a rat brain now. You're cutting through the rat brain and you're looking for binding of the receptor that binds the stress hormone. The stress hormone I told you was cortisol or corticosterone. I will just call it the stress hormone. It become easier. I don't need you to remember jargon at all. So there's this hormone. Remember, your body is secreted this hormone when you were under stress. And under stress, this hormone is going everywhere through the bloodstream. It's also going to the brain. But look where it's going and binding in the brain. You can see this black, almost looks like a black pen-like staining. That's actually the receptor for this stress hormone. There's a ton of this receptor in the hippocampus. So the hormone goes and binds to the receptor in the hippocampus. It's there at very high levels. You don't need to read this text. Bottom line, it's there at high levels in the hippocampus. And the hippocampus does something very interesting. The HPA axis I'm referring to here is the stress hormone axis. It's the axis of the hypothalamus to the pituitary, to the adrenal glands, which secretes eventually your stress hormones. You can call your stress hormones glucocorticoids. Okay. Now these molecules, these hormones are going everywhere. They're going to your muscle, liver, everything. They're also going to the brain and they're binding in the hippocampus because there is a lot of receptor there. And when they bind in the hippocampus, they shut off this axis. They actually turn it off. What a beautiful feedback system. It's a feedback control system. So let's say I'm walking down and there is a dog in my colony. There are no cheetahs, but there are quite a lot of dogs in our colony. And some of these dogs are a little too active. They sometimes chase you. Okay. Now that's not a very pleasant thing when a stray dog chases you. It's not like a cheetah, obviously, but it's still not pleasant. So if I see this dog, I'll be a little bit stressed out and my corticosteroids will be secreted. And maybe I'll walk a lot faster, or I will quickly go into a building or something. But eventually, 5-10 minutes later, when I'm away from the dog, I don't want to keep secreting these stress hormones. I want to shut it down. So by then, my hippocampus is kicked in and said, okay, calm down. It's only a dog. This dog is not going to do anything. It's not interested in you. Look at the dog size. Look at your size. What are you worried about, right? So you turn it off. So you turn off the pathway. But there is also a problem. If this receptor, which is there at a very high level, okay, if you keep, suppose I have got a phobia of dogs now, okay, and there are about 20 dogs in my colony. Every day, in fact, it gets me to the point where I don't even want to go for walks. I'm petrified of these dogs. And every time I even think about a dog, suppose I develop a phobia, and anytime I think about a dog, I start secreting stress hormones. If I keep doing this over and over again, and probably dog is not a great analogy because that terminates, let me think about your boss. A lot of people have very negative relationships sometimes with their bosses. If we are lucky, we have great relationships. If we are not, sometimes we just luck out and don't have a very good person we're working with. And that's chronic. That person is not going anywhere. You are also not going anywhere if you're not quitting, right? And you're in an organization, there's a colleague you don't get along with, then chronically you're secreting stress hormones over and over again. And every time they are bathing your brain and they are binding to these hippocampal neurons because the receptors in the hippocampus. Well, guess what? If you do that for a long time, those neurons will die. Because associated with activating of those receptors are also the activating of machinery that causes death of those cells. So you will destroy those neurons. Now, if you have less neurons and less hippocampal neurons, you cannot shut off the stress hormone pathway. You remember, it's controlling the stress hormone pathway. You can't shut it off, which means you have even more stress hormone, which means you kill even more. It's a vicious cycle. It just sets up and it is quite terrible. So very elegant work from Robert Sapolsky, and when he was a graduate student, and this is work from the 1980s. He went to Uganda and he decided to study baboons in the wild. A beautiful book that he has written about it called The Primate Memoirs. So he was sitting in the wild watching these big baboon monkeys. And, you know, they have a lot of politics in baboon society. So there is an alpha male and then there's a lot of fighting and some baboons are stressed out. And he used to note who's the ones who are the most stressed out, who are the ones who are getting beaten up, who are the ones who are getting the least access to food, who are the least ones who are getting the least access to mates. And he characterized those baboons. And sometimes he noticed that these baboons actually died. Okay. And he wondered, are they dying of stress-associated illness? And after they died, he would take the brain, he would take out the heart, he would take out the adrenal glands. And guess what he saw? The adrenal glands have hypertrophy. There is cardiac myopathy. There is atherosclerosis, classic hallmarks of stress-associated cardiovascular dysfunction. And in the brain, when you look at the hippocampus cells are just gone. The neurons are dead in many cases. Now that was quite scary because baboons are our cousins. Okay, they are really close evolutionary cousins. So now I want to tell you what we know from a lot of evidence in rodents, in monkeys, in tree shrews. The way you respond to the stress depends on many things. If it's a low intensity stress or it's only there for a short-lived time, most likely you will adapt. And on the adaptive side are changes in your brain. You produce more newborn neurons. You have far less anxiety. In fact, you actually learn better under mild stress. And everybody who's ever taken an exam will agree. Thoda stress is a good thing. Little bit of stress is actually keeping your machine oil. You have an improved immunological response. All that happens at the lower intensity, low chronicity of stress. Very severe stress, high intensity, high chronicity goes the other way. You have a lot of anxiety. You actually impair the ability to learn and show cognitive function. Immunological responses are impaired, and the production of newborn neurons and neural stem cell turnover in the brain is also reduced. So you have this kind of adaptive, maladaptive continuum, right? So now the question becomes, how do you respond? Are you going to adapt? How much intensity and chronicity can you tolerate before you switch over to maladaptive, right? That becomes the question. And the fundamental question of resilience. How much is it that you are capable of coping with? When it crosses a certain limit, you will lose the ability to cope. So that is sort of the question. And here's a review that a graduate student of mine and I wrote together where we've just described and summarized adaptive effects versus maladaptive effects. So here is a zoomed up image of the hippocampus in the brain. And what I want you to walk away with is just that under mild stress or adaptive end of stress, neurons actually do very well. They grow new spines, more newborn neurons are added, learning is improved, there is less anxiety, and there are a variety of changes that take place in receptors and signaling pathways which promote adaptation. In fact, you do better under these conditions. You learn better. You are actually coping well with stress. Okay, you're handling it. But there's also the negative side. When the stress becomes very long-lived, it is very severe, it's very intense, or based on your own genetic or life history, you may not be able to cope. In those conditions, neurons actually lose their spines, lose their dendritic arbors, stem cells stop dividing. And in fact, there are a bunch of structural changes and synaptic function changes in the brain. Animals lose the ability to learn as effectively and they show high anxiety, right? So there's this continuum of responses. So I want to now say, my title had early life stress in it. Why did I put that in? Because there are two major players that determine how you will handle stress and where you are on the continuum. One is, of course, a genetic predisposition or not. So what we receive from our ancestors in terms of genetics can also define how well we cope with stress. But I'm not going to focus on that because I think there is another factor that is way more important. The nurture we receive and the quality of care we receive when we are infants directly determines how we will handle stress when we are adults. And this is just a profound regulator of how you cope. Okay. So this is a slide now based on Harlow and Levine's works, the Seymour Levine and Harry Harlow work from the 1950s done at University of Colorado. And the reason why I want to focus on this is to tell you that, okay, we talked about stress reactive pathways, but how do they get set up in the first place? Well, the nature of early environment and nurture you have is a direct regulator of these pathways and how they are established. So when there is high nurture, high quality care, high caregiving environments, you move towards the left-hand side. Modest stress reactivity, reduced risk for stress-associated diseases. On the other hand, when the early environment is highly stressful, or there is maltreatment or a lack of nurture or poor nurture, you move towards the right-hand side, which is increased stress reactivity, increased risk for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, alcoholism, most of the psychiatric disorders, brain aging, etc. Okay. This is why this window is so important. In this window, you determine not just what is happening in that window, you determine what is going to happen for the rest of your life. You are setting up pathways that will determine how you respond when you're an adult. It will determine how you respond when you are aging. It determines your coping and resilience capacity in many fundamental ways. Here is data on the left-hand side from low maternal care. So these are pups that were given low maternal care. Please understand that depending on the species, the nature of care varies. So for example, for rodents, it's only the mother. There is no biparental care. There are many rodents that do biparental care, but the animals that we have in the animal house and which we routinely use for experiments, it's only the maternal care component. When you move to monkeys, maternal care is only one small component of it. It becomes peer circles. There are a lot of aunts, there are grandparents, there's the much more complex primate society. The minute you move to humans, it's even more complex. It's not just the mother, the father, the aunts, the uncles, the caregivers, the teachers. There are a lot of players that are determining the quality of nurture and the quality of care. I want to show you the image on the left-hand side, just to tell you that when there is low maternal care, there is more cell death in the hippocampus. And on the right-hand side is a child, an image from a child, normal children. And this is PET imaging, and this is neglect. And I just want you to notice that there is high activity in the hippocampus here, and there is low activity in the neglected child. Most dramatic examples of this are from the Romanian orphanages, where children were provided food, so they were not nutritionally deprived, but there was some strange policy in the Romanian orphanages of not touching and holding the children. and not cuddling them and not nurturing them. And as associated with that disorder, you develop a condition called stress dwarfism, because the growth hormone gets severely inhibited. And these children who had no genetic reason to be dwarfs actually become stress dwarfs. It's really quite a tragic set of results that we have now access to because of something that was done so unfortunately in Romania. I want to now tell you about Michael Meaney's work. Michael Meaney set up a very interesting set of experiments where he looked at naturally occurring variations in care. So you can just observe, these are Long Evans mothers. So these are Long Evans rats. The black and white rat is a Long Evans strain. And you can see that here on the left-hand side, the mother is actively sitting on top of the pups. And when she does that, she's constantly licking and nurturing them and taking them into her nest and all of that. And on the right-hand side is the low-quality care, which is a passive kind of caregiving where she lies on her side. The pups still get nurture and nutrition, but it is not high quality. And so you can actually measure this. You can measure the number of nurturing bouts, measure the amount of time that is spent in licking and grooming and nursing. And when you then do this and you observe the babies when they become adults, what was striking and what Michael Meaney reported was that the babies born to these kind of mothers show low anxiety and very strong feedback control of the stress hormone pathway. So they switch off the stress hormone pathway super fast. On the right-hand side, these babies, on the other hand, which had access to poor quality maternal care, show high anxiety and decreased feedback control. And the reason this happens is because the receptor expression in the hippocampus seems to be directly correlated with the quality of maternal care received. So when you receive high quality maternal care, you have more receptors. Because you have more receptors, you switch off the stress response much, much faster. The feedback inhibition of the stress response is very strong. On the right-hand side, the receptor number goes down drastically, and as a consequence, the ability to switch off the stress response is reduced. This is just describing the same thing. High caregivers, those babies end up with more receptors. Because they have more receptors, they turn off the response much faster. On the right-hand side, the low caregivers end up with lower amount of receptors, and because of that, they cannot switch off the response. And so the brain and body gets bathed with a lot more stress hormone. And this is evident over here. In the panel on the left-hand side, you're measuring the stress hormone. So the y-axis is the measuring of the stress hormone. These are now babies born to high licking grooming. So high licking grooming means the animals that got good nurture as babies. You're looking at them as adults. Low licking grooming are the animals that had poor nurture. And now in adulthood, they're exposed to a 20-minute stress. So this red bar indicates the duration of the stress. Sure enough, what you can see is that over a period of time, look at the amount of hormone exposure that the high licking grooming animals will have compared to the low licking grooming. This is an integrated response, and you can clearly see that their feedback control is better and the body sees far less stress hormone. They actually adapt very, very effectively. We work on this model as well, and a similar model of early life stress, which is called a maternal separation model, where we take the pups away from the mother every day for 3 hours. And when we do that, the quality of care she gives the pups when they are returned to her deteriorates over time, because she's not choosing to leave and go to feed, find food or whatever. She's in an animal house. The pups are taken away and given back. And when she sees this, it fragments the kind of care she gives to the pups. And Deepika and Vandana in my lab extensively looked at cognitive behavior, structural changes, molecular changes, and then also asked how reversible are this. I'm not going to go into the data. I'm just going to summarize it. What I want you to know is that it matters when you look. Strangely enough, when there has been early stress like maternal separation, in adulthood, the animals are still adapting, and there's an adaptive response. But when they become middle-aged, they show massive maladaptive changes. In fact, they show a steep aging-associated decline. So I would like to wrap up by saying that early life matters. In fact, it matters way more than just that window. That window will determine lifelong changes in memory, stress responses, and there is evidence that it may be associated with a decrease in life expectancy. Now, for a country like ours, for a country like India, which is largely a very young country, we are lopsided towards young people. what we do right in the first 10 to 15 years of their life will determine not just that window, it will determine the rest of their life. So think about what we are doing with our children in terms of the stress exposure that they have. Natural question that comes up is this reversible? Can we, even if there is trauma, and there is indeed trauma, there, forget the challenges associated with poverty. Poverty is a serious stress. It's a serious handicap. Children who come from impoverished backgrounds start several steps behind children who have a lot more privilege. How do we look at this? Is there, I mean, the midday meal, the ability to provide nutrition, the ability to provide basic minerals, nutrients, vitamins, etc. But the importance of care, touch, enriched environment cannot be reduced. That is amongst the most important things. In fact, most profound data with neonatals who are born early, the biggest effects that they see boosting their life expectancy is actually touch and the sound of their mother or their father's voice that they have heard in utero. I just want to end by telling you the focus of my lab. We are interested in neural circuits that shape emotional behavior. We're particularly interested in the early window and why it has lifelong effects. We also study the circuits that regulate antidepressant action. I like to end with this quote because it is absolutely true. It is a favorite quote of mine of T.S. Eliot from Four Quartets, where he says, "In my beginning is my end." So how you will live your life in terms of your resilience, your ability to cope with stress is often in your earliest window already determined. So as people interested in public health, people interested in society, the emphasis should be on youth, and the emphasis should be on making sure that things are done right in that earliest window. I'm done. I'm very happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you, Professor Vaidya. I think